Hey everyone, it's Seth here with another comment response video. You can skip to a topic using the timestamps below. If you have any questions for a future video, you can leave them in the comments. Everything the Drug Classroom does is supported exclusively by donations. If you want to help out, please consider supporting on Patreon. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on darknet markets and how you think they'll change in the near future. I do think if you can use them carefully, then there can be multiple benefits to darknet markets. One benefit is the lower risk of legal action. Another is that it might be easier to find drugs with a high purity and less misrepresentation. It's quite possible to get real LSD and even acceptable quality MDMA, heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine from the markets. I think utilizing widely reviewed and long-standing sellers can help you access better drugs than you'd find on the street. However, that doesn't in any way remove the need for drug checking. Darknet markets have likely altered the drug market for the foreseeable future, and they'll continue to undermine prohibition. I like the idea of online transactions since they reduce the number of potentially dangerous interactions between people. I'm not sure how the markets are going to change, but I have little doubt they'll continue to exist and grow. Research chemical markets on the ClearNet will also remain important. Overall, I'm optimistic about the impact of these markets in the context of prohibition. One of the primary downsides is that uneducated people, including young people, could have easier access to drugs with a low safety ratio. But I think the overall effect is likely positive. Hopefully, there will be an increase in markets that are well policed by the community and that don't include illicit items other than drugs. Do you know of any study with psychedelics for people with bipolar disorder? There haven't been any studies on their use for bipolar as far as I know. Psychedelics have been studied for addiction, depression, and certain kinds of anxiety, and there are researchers hoping to examine their impact on a wider range of conditions, including PTSD, OCD, and generalized anxiety disorder. But so far, we don't know if they'd be a good treatment for bipolar. Outside of medical settings, I recommend people with a bipolar diagnosis avoid psychedelics. While some people will likely report beneficial effects, similar to depression, the results are unpredictable and have the potential to be negative. In controlled therapeutic settings, those potential negatives can be somewhat attenuated. Is there a video about Krokodil yet? I wonder because there's been a lot of confusion about it. Everything related to Krokodil has been attached to desomorphine and codeine, but as you certainly know, desomorphine and codeine are precursors. I'd be glad if you could provide some clarification. I did cover Krokodil a long time ago, and I'll probably redo the video eventually. There's definitely a lot of continued confusion about it. Many articles have discussed Krokodil as though it's an opioid with severe and unique negatives, yet that's not correct. Nearly all of the harm comes from impurities and an otherwise improper synthesis. Typically, it's being created by people who don't really know what they're doing and who have no care for what the quality of their end product is. Desomorphine is frequently just a small part of the mixture, and sometimes it's entirely absent. The rest of the substance is a random mix of chemicals, some of which can be very dangerous, and that results in problems like severe tissue damage and organ failure. If you could get pure desomorphine, similar to pure heroin, we would see fewer medical problems. Desomorphine isn't really functioning as a precursor, though codeine is. Instead, the production is so terrible, you end up with dangerous substances and a mixture that's acidic, and that's what people inject. Of course, people are going to mess up their bodies when that's the kind of low-quality product they're using. If you were to have a liquor store-like setup for selling desomorphine, most of those problems would quickly decline. I don't think this guy has ever taken a hit of DMT. Yes, it is the spirit molecule. Stop reading, mate, and start smoking. I have taken DMT a few times, and it does seem like an interesting drug, but I'd like every person who believes DMT is undoubtedly more than just a drug to also accept beliefs in ghosts, elves, witches, pixies, fairies, God, skinwalkers, Ouija, Satan, UFOs, the afterlife, ancestor communication, and Bigfoot. I don't say this to be dismissive, but rather to point out that all of these things share the same underlying form of evidence, personal experience. experience. Even I've had personal experiences that could be used to justify beliefs of this sort, but I also know how susceptible the human brain is to hallucination and delusion. People have been seeing ghosts for millennia, and countless people have ghost experiences every year. Some of those involve full-blown waking hallucinations, often while sober. So when a drug comes along and gives people a hallucination that makes some people believe in other dimensions and entities, I don't consider it anything new. We need a lot more evidence for any of these things to be considered true. This is the reason the scientific method exists. It's not meant to take all of the cool beliefs out of the world, but instead to figure out which ones have a basis in reality. We know that just relying on personal experience is way too often going to lead down a path away from reality. If you feel that a DMT experience, which could very well be the result of materialist brain activity, is proof of something more, I think for the sake of consistency, you need to consider everyone else's beliefs to also be legitimate. There are thousands of beliefs present in cultures across the planet. Many of them are conflicting, and they all have nearly the same support. But if you still feel like personal experience is good enough to support massive claims, then go ahead. I personally view the experiences offered by DMT, salvia, and other drugs to be encouraging in an entirely different way. I think they're evidence of how much the brain is capable of, and they suggest we could often be underestimating the brain. If we can find ways to further utilize these states, that could be very useful. I just don't think they're proof of other dimensions. Taking natural stuff like cacti and mushrooms seems like a much safer way to go than using research chemicals. Without a doubt, I'll continue to have this conversation for many years to come. One thing I will say that's somewhat supportive is that cacti and mushrooms have a long history of use. Psilocybin and mescaline are known to be pretty safe drugs, even when someone overdoses. We clearly know less about research chemicals, but there's nothing inherently special about natural stuff. Synthetic drugs can be safe or safer, and one of the benefits of using individual isolated chemicals is that you can more easily control the dose. When you're taking mushrooms or cacti, you don't really know how much you're taking. With research chemicals, I haven't seen any reason to worry more about a common 1p LSD or 4-hydroxy-MET dose than a common psilocin dose. You can take a common amount of most drugs without much concern. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. You can also reach me via email at seth@thedrugclassroom.com. Donations are the only funding source for The Drug Classroom, so if you want to support, please do so on Patreon.